Thanks for coming along today. So Jane will be presenting her final year review. Jane's been hard at work on the literature review, a Delphi study, and she's got one final study to go, which is an observational study. She'll tell you more about that. Jane?
Chris already said everything, so I'm done. No. But as this is my final year review, my topic focuses a lot on factors associated with engagement in online professional learning. So just an overview of the presentation. I'll start with some background on online learning and the importance of engagement in professional development. Talk about what was done in the systematic review and Delphi study, and then kind of the ideas going into the final study, the observational study. So to begin, ever since we've had access to the internet, online learning also has been around. Started as simple websites with text on it, has evolved into more gamified learning experiences. And the structure of online learning can range from just a series of videos all the way to blended learning, where half of it is face-to-face and the other half is on dedicated learning management systems such as Moodle, Blackboard, Canvas, just to name a few. And so, of course, all these online learning opportunities also come with a range of costs. Some are free, such as Khan Academy on YouTube, to all the paid courses that you can see on Udemy or Coursera or edX. So, all these examples that I've given you about online learning opportunities have much to do with students. So, people enrolled in elementary to primary to tertiary education. In fact, a lot of the literature on online learning has to do with this group of individuals. So less research has been done on online learning for work-related reasons, so that is professional development. And just going forward, I just want to differentiate between these two groups as students and learners. So why professional development is important. A lot of literature has looked at just professional development, and usually those individuals who participate in professional development do have better job performance, and with, I guess, online learning research with students, we've seen that more engaged learning has led to higher academic outcomes. So there is one big issue with online learning, though. So let's take these 10 online learners here. By the end of the course, around only one of them will actually complete all the course activities. So that's a completion rate of 10%. And this is an issue, especially with professional development, because the aim of professional development is to help individuals maintain competency as well as to help them grow professionally. So what are some of the ways to actually, how do we get this group of learners to actually do the online learning? Or what factors drive engagement in online learning? Well, that's the main question of my thesis, trying to find out factors that will associate or influence engagement in online professional development. So there are two frameworks that I've used to kind of structure the organization of this. So with factors, divided into several categories. The first one, individual factors, which relate to a learner's demographics, their self-efficacy, and sorry, mind blank. There are some examples: self-efficacy, demographics, and their perceptions of the online learning experience. Another category of system factors, so this has to do with the professional development course or the learning management system that it's actually on. So examples of these factors include ease of use and quality of content, and the last category, environmental factors. So this is aspects that affect the individual other than the system factors. So things like whether or not the organization that provided professional development actually gave them a space to do the professional development, or situational factors such as whether or not the learner has familial responsibilities. So that's how the factors are organized. And in terms of engagement, engagement's a little bit special. It's been looked at over many different areas, and in each area, engagement means kind of has a unique definition in every context. But overall, it can be divided into 3 dimensions. Emotional, which has to do with the learner's feelings of a learning experience. Cognitive, so the effort that they put into an online learning experience. And behavioral, so the tangible actions that you could see a learner do. So within the learner engagement literature, we can further look at this more between deep learning and surface learning, where surface learners only engage behaviorally, and with deep learning, they engage in all 3 dimensions. So, as I said before, engagement is very it's specific to context, and so within this thesis, I've used this engagement definition to kind of use it as a framework for what engagement means. It's the emotional, cognitive, and behavioral connection that exists at any point in time and possibly over time between a user and a resource. The user being the learner and the resource being the online professional development course. I purposely kept this a little bit more broad and open, and to be able to capture everything that's in the academic literature, and the categorization might be a little oversimplified, but I guess that's the point of this research, to figure out if it can be broken down into a more nuanced framework. So to start with my first study, it was a systematic review that's broken down into meta-analysis and qualitative synthesis. And then the second study was the Delphi study. And both these studies, the aims were to identify factors that were important in influencing or associated with engagement in online professional development. So with these 3 sets of data, I'm able to triangulate the results and offer more robust results from that, but more on triangulation later. So to start off with the systematic review, here's the Prisma diagram. Started off with around 23,000 records and ended up with around 51 studies which were eligible for the qualitative synthesis, and within those 51 studies, 21 of those studies were included in the meta-analysis. So with the meta-analysis, I was looking at how the different categories of factors were associated with the different dimensions of engagement. So I didn't want to just see how the factors were associated with overall engagement, and so a meta-analysis was actually done for every dimension. But to simplify this down, the overall, I guess, categorical effect on emotional engagement was moderate and positive. Same with cognitive engagement, and with behavioral engagement, the effects were quite weak. And so if you take a look on significance, all the factor categories are actually significant for emotional and cognitive engagement, and none of the factor categories were significant with behavioral engagement. So that's actually one of the key takeaways from the meta-analysis. Factors, I guess, more significantly associated with emotional and cognitive engagement, and just one of the specific factors were significantly associated with behavioral engagement, which is situational factors. Just as a reminder, situational factors include whether or not the learner has familial responsibilities, or whether I guess the organization has offered space for learners to actually do their own professional development, among other examples. And so that's the end of the first part of the systematic review. So with the qualitative synthesis, I also wanted to look at how each category of factors were associated with each of the dimensions of engagement again. And so took all the results from the 51 eligible articles, did some content analysis, and we were able to identify some of the more salient specific factors that were mentioned that were related to different dimensions of engagement. So as you can see, with behavioral engagement, a lot more factors are actually mentioned in the qualitative synthesis, which is one of the key takeaways for the qualitative synthesis. And it's different because it wasn't really captured, we weren't able to capture significant relationships between factors and behavioral engagement in the meta-analysis. So another important takeaway here is we identified 64 unique associations between factors and dimensions of engagement. 36 of these associations were identified in 3 or more studies, but that leaves about half that were only identified in 1 to 2 studies, which makes comparing results a little bit challenging. So the systematic, this is the end of the qualitative synthesis and the analysis of the academic literature. And we're finding that it was we were missing a very key, I guess, component of people who could actually provide information about online professional development or aspects that would affect engagement in online professional development, and which is why we did the Delphi study. So the Delphi study is a survey-based research methodology where the primary aim is to reach consensus on a topic of interest. So of course the topic of interest here is to identify factors which are important in influencing engagement in online professional development. And the experts, of course, are those who are online educators within the online learning and professional development field. This is well placed, this research methodology is well placed to be used to get a global sample since we use Qualtrics to disseminate the surveys. So just to give you a run through of what that looks like, what a Delphi study looks like, start off with recruitment. So I invited 274 experts which were identified through LinkedIn, relevant meetup groups, and personal contacts, and making sure that they had the relevant experience needed to participate in the study. Wanted to ensure that each of these experts that would be eligible had multiple experiences developing, maintaining, and evaluating online professional development courses. And so by the end of recruitment, we received 43 consents from eligible experts, and then we took these experts and sent them the first survey. So with how the Delphi survey works, because it uses expert opinion, the first survey is usually an open-ended question survey to capture the ideas out there. You take the responses from that survey, do some content analysis on that, and from that I was able to identify the specific factors that experts were talking about and specific measures of engagement that they know of. And so we send that list of factors and measures back to them, get them to rate them for their importance. Then it's rated twice. And because the point of the Delphi study is to find consensus, both in the second and third survey, why there's a second round, is the participants are given a chance to provide any other, any other factors that they thought might have been left off the list. And so they are rated in the third survey. And from the responses in the second and third survey, we were able to identify which factors came to an agreement. So at the end of the study, I did send a report back to all the participants and experts in the study, and this is kind of how I was able to send it to them. All these are, every bar is a factor that they've identified and I've grouped it into the 3 categories. All the lighter colored ones are the ones that if the experts came to agreement on. And just to simplify these results, they're organized into the 3 categories, and the factors here just show how many of them came to agreement. And as you can see, the system factors were the most that came to consensus. That is one of the key takeaways from the Delphi study, because it goes to show that perhaps they, I guess experts may come to agreement more on system factors because they've had more opportunity to kind of change some of those factors in their experiences to see what works and what doesn't work with online professional learners. Also, I slightly mentioned it before about getting also additional information from these experts about measures of engagement. Another interesting point from the study was we identified that some of the measures that they use often are not all the time the most effective measures that they thought were on the list. So, this is the end of the Delphi study. What do we do with all this results? Well, I've taken all 3 data sets and triangulated to, one, identify kind of gaps in the literature, but also to identify the most salient factors to help online educators or even academics to build a more evidence-based framework to create engaging online professional development courses. So with this bar graph, as you can see, over the meta-analysis, qualitative synthesis, and Delphi study, there were a similar number of individual factors that have been identified. But expressly with the Delphi study, you can see that a lot more system and environmental factors were identified compared with the meta-analysis and qualitative synthesis. So there is a little bit of gap in the academic literature that maybe doesn't look at some of those factors, and key reason why the Delphi was so important to be done. In terms of recommendations, I looked at, cross-evaluated all those 3 data sets and came up with some recommendations, something that I like to call engagement pie. So there are 3 levels of support that can be for an online professional learning course. There are 3 levels of support for some of the engagement factors. So we start off with the plate, the most foundational one, and where organizations need to be able to provide time and provide learners with access to learning needs so that they can actually do the professional development course. And over here will just be where these factors were identified in 3 data sets. And so we get to the middle part, the most meaty, actually the pie portion of it. Then that has to be related to the online educators. They are needed to create well-structured and interactive online professional learning courses, and to make sure that the content there is relevant for learners' professional growth. And lastly, the whipped cream with the cherry on top. It is good for online educators to kind of preface learners to think about why they're actually enrolling in professional development, and not just to do it because they have to. It actually does help them, I guess, think about why they're doing a course and get them a little bit more engaged. So some of the key takeaways from this is obviously engagement pie. But from the first bar chart, we saw that there were some differences between academic literature and the Delphi study. So more collaboration is needed between academics and industry experts. And lastly, general observation that there is a need for standardizing and validating factors and measures. So that brings me to my final study, the observational study. So with engagement, online learning is really easy to measure behavioral engagement, since behavioral engagement looks at the tangible actions. So this can be seen on online professional development courses based on how much time people spend on learning management systems, how many modules they complete, how many links they click, and these are all reported on the learning management system. What's more difficult to actually capture is emotional and cognitive engagement. So what has happened so far to capture that is actually getting learners to complete a survey at the end of the course. And one, that is subjective, and two, it doesn't really capture the experience of the learner throughout the course, and by doing the survey at the end of the course, it may suffer from recall bias. So, what can we do about that? As I mentioned earlier, my definition of engagement talks about engagement at one point in time or possibly over time, the relationship between the user and the resource. So what's fortunate about a lot of professional development courses is that they are quite modular. So you finish module 1, then you complete the next one, and then you complete the next one. And with each module, at the end of at the end of the learning content, you have several questions which ask you to reflect on your learning. So from each module to each module, you're being asked similar questions. And a lot of linguistics research has been able to identify differences in emotions and cognitive behavior based on textual analysis. So the thoughts for this observational study is actually to look at each module, the learners' responses in each module, to compare them from throughout their course and be able to actually map out their emotional and cognitive engagement throughout. And based on the meta-analysis, it would suggest that perhaps individuals, learners are emotionally and cognitively engaged, and perhaps increasing that or finding out differences within the textual analysis to be able to find out patterns that may contribute to more behavioral engagement. And so the data set that we're using is the iPlay data set, which is fortunately also an online modular professional learning course. And by doing so, it actually will be able to see if there are patterns involved in different types of behaviorally engaged learners. So different types of learners in the literature simply categorized would be those who complete the course and those who do not complete the course. And you can see if we can map out the emotional and cognitive engagement patterns, if that can explain why or why not they do so. So this is an ongoing study, so I don't really have results to show you guys yet about that, but just to review what I've done so far in my PhD, I started off with systematic review, which included meta-analysis and the qualitative synthesis. Then I did the Delphi study, took those 3 data sets, triangulated them, was able to identify some research gaps and some recommendations for online educators on how to build engaging online professional development courses. And based on those gaps, I'm trying to see if textual differences and patterns can explain emotional and cognitive engagement, and whether that can predict behavioral engagement. And that is the end of my final year review. Thank you guys for your time. And
wow. That is an incredible thesis, and I love the way how you've structured it, and like, I can't believe how much work you've done. It is huge. And I love the way how one study flows to another, and how you've been able to triangulate the findings, and the way that you've used the Delphi method as well is just sensational. You really need to be congratulated. I think you've done a fantastic job. And it's really interesting because, can I say, in IPPE, we're always looking for ways to make online materials, and we haven't been particularly great at it because none of us really have the expertise. So the findings from your research, I think, are going to be very relevant to some of the things we do in IPPE, because we can learn from your work how to do it the right way. So well done. Yeah, postdoc. Come back. Come back. Don't leave us.
I was struggling with, as you were, the definition of engagement. And it seemed like there was a 3x2 definition that you had. You had subjective and objective, and then your behavioral and cognitive and emotional. And the issue that I was, first of all, I get very worried about differentiating between objective and subjective, in that the objective is oftentimes things that are easy to measure, but may be at best vaguely related to the construct, whereas the subjective is typically more closely related to what you actually want to measure, but but is inevitable that it's self-report or possibly an observer report. So there's that kind of struggle. But I see you've got this overarching latent construct engagement, and then you've got these indicators of them. And there's sort of an assumption that they fall into these three categories. And I don't think that you've done a good job of trying to test whether those are differentiable in terms of the making predictions as to which ones should be more related to which outcomes and things like that. Now, this isn't a criticism of the thesis, it's a criticism really of the area. And I understand that it's a really hard one. I hadn't realized how bad the measurement was in this area of engagement until I read your thesis. But that seems to be a fundamental issue that you've had to struggle with.
Yeah. And I guess there's a lot of work being done on it, but as you probably listened to a couple months ago, Professor Marshall Reeves had this idea of kind of breaking apart that kind of just those three dimensions of engagement. And it was interesting because actually some of the results from the Delphi study did talk about a more, I guess, agentic engagement, where some of the measures of engagement that experts look at proactivity of the individual. And so that kind of didn't really fit in any of those three dimensions that I talked about at the beginning, but it was just somewhere for me to start off with, and perhaps knowing this, going forward, you can build a better kind of framework. I don't know, maybe not specifically for online professional development, maybe it would be more relevant to engagement as a whole. Yeah.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. Congratulations, as Rhonda said, it is big, it's vast, it's great. I noticed too with the struggle to get a definition for engagement. Hattie talks about, you don't always need a simple definition. He talks about open concepts. You have a series of sentences that are all a bit different, and they combine like strands in a rope to give you something more comprehensive. So, but I realise for something like this, it's always good to have a single definition. I was having done online learning myself successfully. I was surprised that only 1 in 10 get through now, because in the cohort I was with, I think I've done it a couple of times, many years ago, this was pre-Facebook days when social media and that wasn't as in as what it is today. So when perhaps, when I did it way back when, I don't know, maybe the online learners took it more seriously. It was, the online aspect wasn't just novel. It wasn't just something they were used to. It was something to be respected by, and perhaps even a little bit fearful of. I don't know. But, the cohort I was with, we were all very dedicated, and had to do what you had to do?
Yeah, I think it does definitely range in completion rates. I think my 10% statistic was kind of just looking at overall learning engagement, and as we go on further in the years, online learning is just going to be something that's very normal, normalized within society. And it does talk, and in some of the research it does talk about how, or some of the studies that I looked at in the qualitative synthesis, there are studies that specifically looked for organizations that had implemented online learning for a couple of years, so it gets rid of that novelty. To just see if we get rid of the aspect of novelty, how much difference would it make for learners to actually complete or not complete or do any of the professional development. And I guess a lot of the time you get different results. I think a specific thing that I can remember from edX statistics is there's one specific course on horse nutrition, and it always gets like 100% completion rate. But it's also a very niche kind of topic, and I feel that people who are going into that course are really trying to know all of it, whereas maybe something that's like a statistics 101, they want to know a certain part of that course, and the rest of it, maybe they already know or are not interested in it, and then may drop out. So, don't really know what to say about it in terms of, I guess, that's like, because online learning is just so prevalent nowadays, like the 10% statistic is quite low.
I was struck by the juxtaposition between your experts and your meta-analysis. It was almost a mirror image of each other, and I was trying to think of that, why that would be, and it struck me that the experts are probably primarily responsible for developing the systems, and so they've grossly exaggerated the importance of those, and in fact maybe they aren't really all that important. The individual learner and some of the individual characteristics are really more important. It's also thinking there might be some interesting interactions, so that if you're gung-ho about it, if your interest is high and your self-efficacy is high, and all those sorts of things, it may not matter if the course is not very good or the system is a little bit dodgy. Whereas if those motivational aspects are not very high, then it's probably much easier to get turned off.
Yeah, and actually, I think that was actually one of, I guess, some of the things that were looked at as qualitative synthesis. They did say that even if the system was rated less on quality, ease of use, high motivation was always a key factor in looking really engaging or emotionally cognitively engaging as well. But I also do think that because the professionals or the experts in the industry have a chance to look at multiple courses maybe at the same time, that they're able to tweak things, which is something that usually research studies aren't able to do. I haven't come across an article which looked at multiple online professional developments concurrently, so there may be something